But briefly about Dr. Suzan is that she began her 18-year career with the FBI, where she still is, first as a forensic mitochondrial DNA examiner, and later as a supervisor for the DNA analysis group for the FBI's Terrorist Explosive Device Analytical Center. She's currently serving as a management and program analyst with the Chemical Biological Countermeasures Unit in the Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate of the FBI, participating in outreach and countermeasure initiatives to prevent the production, acquisition, and misuse of biological agents. Dr. Cropp earned a doctoral degree in evolution and population biology from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. However, now she has a new title, so possibly she will update us about that before she then moves on to share with us about the U.S. Federal Select Agent Program of the FBI. You're most welcome, Dr. Cropp.
Thank you. Good morning. I am so sorry for not being able to be with you all in person today, but thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today. As Ian has said, I'm from the Chemical Biological Countermeasures Unit in the Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate at the FBI. I wanted to take just a brief moment before I get started on my presentation to explain to you exactly what the Countermeasures Unit does. So officially, the Chemical Biological Countermeasures Unit seeks to identify chemical and biological WMD threats and helps enhance public and private partnerships to better mitigate and respond to current or emerging threats. But practically, what does that actually mean? At least for my position, what it means is that we do a lot of training and outreach to academia and industry. And that's on a broad spectrum of biosecurity topics. The purpose is to help them understand how to protect themselves and their work, but also helps us establish a relationship with them so that they can feel comfortable coming to us if they have questions about biosecurity, or if they have some concerns and they just need to know if there's something that they need to do about it. We also work with our government and law enforcement partners, both domestic and international, so that we can all be aware of emerging threats and biosecurity issues. So in short, we like to say we do everything possible to stay left of boom. And that's our way of saying, at least from an explosive standpoint, we do everything we can to prevent an explosion from ever happening. And that can mean, the traditional bomb type of explosion, but also the explosion of a disease, of a GCBRI, that could affect everyone. All right, so as my title says, I'm going to talk to you about the U.S. Select Agent Program. So what is exactly a select agent? In determining whether to include an agent or a toxin on the select agent list, the Public Health Security and Bioterrorism Preparedness Act in the United States requires that we consider the following criteria: the effect on human health or exposure to that agent or toxin, the degree of contagiousness of that agent or toxin, and the means by which it can be transferred amongst human beings, and the availability and effectiveness of therapies or cures to treat and prevent any illness that might result from infection of that agent and toxin. And also the needs of any other vulnerable populations, the elderly, children, that are necessary to establish what agents or toxins need to be on this list. So if something is an extreme threat, if it is easily transmitted between human beings, if there is no or very ineffective preventative measures or cures available for a particular agent or toxin, then it's more likely that that particular item is going to be placed on the select agent
Recording
list.
stopped.
So select agents are going to vary by country because each country has to decide what particular agents and biological toxins that are endemic in their country, which ones are most likely to be introduced or to be to which they have very little countermeasures. And so, at least in the U.S., the select agent list that we have, and I didn't put it up here again because it's going to vary according to what country you're in. The select agent lists here in the U.S. are reviewed and republished every couple of years, more often if it's necessary. And there are actually 4 components to our select agent list. There is the Health and Human Services Select Agents and Toxins. There's the USDA, that's the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Veterinary Service Select Agents and Toxins. The U.S. Department of Agriculture Plant Protection and Quarantine Select Agents and Toxins. So we're not talking just about bioorganisms that can affect humans, but also those that can affect agricultural animals as well as agricultural plants in the U.S. because that would affect our ability to provide food for the country. And then there's also an overlapping list of just select agents and toxins. So there's actually 4 sublists within our list. In 2016, in response to the World Health Organization's joint external evaluation, Uganda implemented a centralized national electronic database for dangerous pathogens. Now, this was a major accomplishment towards developing biosecurity and biosafety capacities. Why was this such an important step anyway? Because in the event of an outbreak, this kind of information will assist the Ugandan Ministry of Health protect the public from these infectious diseases. Knowing where these particular pathogens are and what institutions are handling them can help trace where an outbreak might have occurred and to prevent one from happening in the first place. The Federal Select Agent Program in the United States was established in response to a U.S. congressional mandate to ensure the safety and security of research with biological select agents and toxins. With oversight from the Federal Select Agent Program, entities are able to work as safely and securely as possible with select agents and toxins. This has led to very important scientific discoveries that have improved diagnostics and detection, treatment, and prevention of human, animal, and plant diseases. The FSAP, as we like to call the Federal Select Agent Program, is jointly managed by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, specifically the Center for Preparedness and Response, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, specifically the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. Now, there are several things that this program are responsible for. The program, of course, is responsible for developing the regulations. They're responsible for maintaining the national database, those lists of select agents and toxins that I mentioned previously, but also maintaining where they are, and importantly, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit more in just a moment, the individuals who are allowed to handle those select agents. Because we also have to make sure that all the individuals who work with them undergo a security risk assessment. And that's where the FBI comes in, and that's why I'm talking to you about this today. And the FSAP also provides guidance to those institutions that are able to handle these select agents, they provide regulations and help them develop guidance documents to be able to handle them safely. Again, these are our partners, the Department of Health and Human Services, very specifically within HHS, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and that's the Animal Plant Health Information Services. Below that, you see my sort of chain of command. The Department of Justice is the overall lead for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And within the FBI, we have the Bioterrorism Risk Assessment Group that does some of these assessments on individuals who are applying to be able to handle select agents. Now, this is what this is the basic process by which an FBI biosecurity risk assessment takes place. And when I say that, I'm talking about the individuals who would like to be qualified, who would like to be licensed to be able to handle select agents, because at least here in the U.S., it's not just that we understand where the institutions where these agents and toxins are handled, because that is certainly part of what the FSAP does, is those institutions have to undergo review and qualification to be able to work with these agents, but also the individuals within the institutions have to be qualified as well. So this is the process by which those individuals become granted the permission to work with these agents and toxins. So first of all, the institution for which they work will do a review of that person, and they will send an application to HHS and USDA and say, listen, this is a new person that we would like to be able to work with select agents. We are going to sponsor them. We think that they should be able to do this. And so from there, that background form that comes through the institution and through, and is funneled through HHS and USDA gets sent to the FBI, and fingerprints are collected from that individual. That background form and that fingerprint card then go to our Criminal Justice Information Service, and of course that Bioterrorism Risk Assessment Group that I explained in the previous slide. All that information gets checked out by CJIS and BRAG. In addition, the FBI has database checks, and those are databases that are available to us, law enforcement databases, and there are a number of different databases that we check. We look at a person's criminal background to see if they have one, and to see what those incidents might be if they do have a criminal background. And the results of all of those checks then go back to HHS and USDA. So it is not actually the FBI who makes the decision, but we make the recommendation. We explain the results of the database checks and whether or not those meet specific criteria, or whether they would disqualify a person from handling select agents and toxins based on specific criteria that we'll talk about in a moment. And then that goes back to HHS and USDA for final disposition. So here are some of the provisions that we have for actually rejecting an applicant. So if someone applies to be able to handle a select agent and do research, there are a number of things, as you see listed here, that can disqualify them for being able to do those. And those are contained under two specific U.S. laws. First of all, the USA Patriot Act. And as you can see, there are a number of disqualifiers, I guess you could say, that would prevent somebody from being able to handle a select agent, as well as the Bioterrorism Response Act. Now, a lot of these involve a criminal background. And so being convicted of a crime that is punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding a year, being a fugitive from justice, an unlawful user of a controlled substance. So these are all legal issues that would prevent someone from being able to handle a select agent. And I'm just going to let you go ahead and read through those. These, of course, are listed under the requirements for the U.S. Federal Select Agent Program, and those are all published online. And so, rather than read through all of these for you, we will talk for a moment about a practical example and show you exactly what that means. So the idea of doing this reliability and suitability personnel review is that we understand that there's a very broad risk spectrum. And the background form is designed to handle what we hope is sort of the lower end of that spectrum that might reveal information on a person that you don't need to check a special database or have access to the sort of criminal databases that the FBI has to be able to check that information. And presumably, depending on the institution, the institution that is applying for an individual to have permission to work with a select agent might see something on this background form themselves that would say to them, yeah, this isn't really somebody we want to be handling this in our institution. But then there's this other range, the higher, riskier range of the risk spectrum that the FBI's security risk or SRA assessment will actually reveal. And so with these two separate evaluations, the hope is that we will cover a very broad spectrum of the risks involved with a particular person handling a select agent or toxin. So as I said, let's take a look at an actual example of an applicant. Obviously, there are not going to be any names involved with this, but this is the actual risk assessment profile for an individual. So I will go through this sort of in detail, just so that you get an idea of the kinds of things that we see when someone applies. Now, so this person has applied, and the FBI has done their check and found in their criminal database that in 1986, for example, this person was convicted of fraud, and that with that fraud conviction, that was a misdemeanor. So there was no actual, so there was not prison time over a year, which is one of the disqualifiers. Again, in 1990, so 4 years later, they were convicted of theft by check, which is another sort of form of fraud. Again, another misdemeanor, but not prison time equaling or totaling a year. 5 years later, they were charged with assault with a deadly weapon. And that, aggravated assault is a felony in the United States. However, they were given a 5-year suspended sentence and probation. So they were not sent to prison. They had they had probation, not prison. And eventually that conviction was set aside. A couple years later, another assault with bodily injury. For whatever reason, those charges were dismissed. So there's no conviction and no prison time. Again, same year, same month, theft of property, but that theft totaled between $20 and $500, and so it was deemed a misdemeanor. And again, there was no prison time involved that would have been more than a year. Another assault with bodily injury, so it was an assault on a family member. Because the circumstances of that assault, it was deemed a misdemeanor. Again, no prison time equaling a year. And finally, in 2011, they were charged with driving while intoxicated, so drunk driving, and possession of a controlled substance. At the time that this person applied to be able to handle a select agent, that those charges, those 2011 charges, were actually pending. So they'd been referred to a county attorney, a prosecutor, to determine whether or not that those charges would be, prosecuted. And so there was not actually any sort of resolution to those particular charges. So look at this yourself and think, just based on this information, is this someone you would want to work with dangerous pathogens or toxins? I know what I would say. I would have to say no. And you would think, just based on looking at this, you would think, well, certainly this person would have to be denied being able to do that. However, that is not the case. And this is why. The maximum prison imprisonment for misdemeanors, as I said, does not exceed a year. And in that list of restrictors that I showed you on an earlier slide, in order to disqualify someone, they would have to be convicted in a court by punishment of imprisonment exceeding a year. And so because this individual did not spend any particular conviction in prison for more than a year, that did not disqualify them. The applicant also didn't meet that one of the restrictors of unlawful user of a controlled substance, because that very last arrest of driving while under the effect of a controlled substance and possession of a controlled substance there was no disposition, there was no actual conviction of that crime. Now, the FBI will regularly check court records for final disposition on events that haven't been finalized when doing the background check on a person. And so if that person does happen to be convicted of a controlled substance, possession of a controlled substance, then they would be denied. But at the time that this was done, this person would not be rejected. And that's the only information that gets sent to HHS and USDA. So what else can be done? Well, of course, I hope what's obvious to you from these previous slides is it's very important to vet the individuals that are working in your lab. And even if you don't have the resources or a system to vet individuals in place the way the FBI does, even if you don't have that law enforcement access to be able to say, okay, let's do this law enforcement check on a person, you do have the ability to interview a person and get to know that person. And what I'd like you to do is think about the qualities that you might look for in a scientist. And here are some of the things that that come to mind, and hopefully they come to your mind as well. You obviously want that individual to be someone who knows what they're doing. You want them to be smart. You want them to have a good work ethic, obviously a good education. At least here in the United States, one of the things that they look for scientists when they're hired, particularly at universities, is that they have a good publication record, and other things. They have good skills, communication, computer skills, and that they're competent for the job that you're hiring them for. And I think that they're qualities that we all generally look for. Well, let's go to one more example, if you don't mind. And this is something that I've added in since the first time. What I'd like to do is talk to you about Diane Thompson, and we like to call her the Muffin Lady. And that will, let me tell you the story of Diane Thompson, and you'll see why we call her the Muffin Lady. So, on October 29th, 1996, this woman, Diane Thompson, sent an anonymous email inviting her colleagues at a hospital laboratory to help themselves to a batch of pastries that included donuts and blueberry muffins, which is why I call her the Muffin Lady, that she had placed in the hospital break room. 12 of the employees between morning and afternoon that day actually went to the break room and consumed those pastries. By 4 o'clock the next morning, all of those individuals started suffering the symptoms of gastroenteritis, and 5 employees actually had to go to the hospital to seek care, and 4 of them actually were hospitalized. In investigating what happened, why suddenly so many people in the same place got ill, the investigation focused on this woman. Let's see. So this is what happened. In investigating her, they discovered that this was not her first offense. In 1995, so a year previously, it turns out she had also given food tainted with an unknown pathogen to her boyfriend at the time. And he had similar symptoms to those experienced by her coworkers, including diarrhea and fever, and he had also been hospitalized. And as it turns out, what had happened is Diane Thompson had obtained Shigella enteritis bacterium from a freezer in the laboratory where she worked, and she had used it to poison her boyfriend, to poison his food and his drink, and it wasn't detected that he had been sick from Shigella a year previously because she worked at the hospital and she actually altered his laboratory results. And so it was unknown exactly what had made him ill at the time. But then when this happened, this larger poisoning, and so many people became ill, that what she had done was finally uncovered. So she eventually pleaded guilty to 4 counts of tampering with consumer products. And what that means is that she contaminated them with Shigella that she was able to get out of the freezer where she worked. And she got 4 concurrent criminal prison terms, including a couple of years that was running concurrently for poisoning her boyfriend. Now, during court, she was actually unable to explain why she committed the crime, or unwilling. But she was very emotional at times during her testimony, and she often seemed confused as well. And so, according to testimony, she had used she had contaminated the muffins and the donuts with Shigella, and she also admitted to poisoning her boyfriend. So, what exactly happened here? Well, unfortunately, this person, who was perhaps a little bit unstable, had access that no one realized that she had to a bacterium that could cause very serious illness. And in people who are immunocompromised, or very old people or very young people, at times, infection with Shigella can be fatal. So it wasn't just a minor thing that she had done. Apparently, one of her coworkers, when this all went to court, said that she kept reminding the coworkers about the pastries, and that she even walked them down to the break room and said, "There they are, please eat some." And so there were several problems that happened that allowed this to occur. First of all, she was perhaps not the most stable person, someone who should not have had access to a dangerous bacterium, but also, as was testified to during court, the hospital said that they actually had made changes in their procedures and the ways that people had access to things like Shigella, so that unauthorized people, and she was not authorized to access that particular bacterium. So they had to make changes to the hospital to make certain that people like that could not actually get access to various frozen bacteria. So as you can see, this wasn't even something that was intended to be a large-scale attack. There are some thoughts, although it never was made clear, that in an attempt to cover up the fact of what had happened to her boyfriend, she then poisoned her coworkers as well. So it would look like it wasn't such an isolated incident, that her boyfriend had been poisoned. But again, we really don't know that for sure. So even something as simple as someone wanting to poison her boyfriend because he had decided to break up with her is something that we want to prevent because it can become something larger very quickly. So what else can you do? As I said, if you don't have access to the kinds of information or the laws in place, actually, to do the kind of background checks that we do here in the U.S., to do the criminal history background checks, there are still some things that you can think about when you are deciding on who can actually handle dangerous pathogens or select agents or toxins. And so, in addition to those qualities that you want to see in a good researcher, in a good biologist, there might be some other qualities that you want to think about as well. Someone who is stable, someone who is kind and responsible, certainly someone who's nonviolent, someone that you can trust, a person who demonstrates that they can follow rules. And what I will say is that while knowing exactly where dangerous pathogens are being handled is it's a very good thing, and it's certainly the first step in being able to ensure that these dangerous materials don't get into the hands of someone if you don't want them to get into their hands. But then also knowing the individuals who are working with them. So even if you don't have the ability to do background checks or investigate these individuals, at least having a list, having a controlled list and knowing exactly who is handling these materials also goes a long way towards knowing that you are maintaining the biosecurity of those particular agents. So I'm going to end there and take questions. There is my contact information. Your best bet for getting in touch with me is to use my my email address, because I always have access to that no matter where I am. And as I've said, I'm more than happy to provide you with the information that supports these slides, if not the slides. So I'll stop there. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Dr. Cropp, for the wonderful facilitation. Any questions here or online? I have a question. Are there any other countries that you've supported in developing their own select agent program, or so far it's only observation from the US?
So are you talking about in terms of investigations or in terms of other countries that have this system in place?
Yes, are there other countries, the US, the FBI has supported to develop their own kind of systems to have that kind of verification?
So no, I mean, we have the authority based on US laws to be able to do these specific investigations here in the US, but we don't have we are not authorized to do those kinds of investigations for other countries, if that's what you're asking me. But again, that's as I mentioned, it's something that that we have legally in place in our country, and those investigations take place when someone applies to be able to handle selected agents, and so they know in advance that they're going to be investigated in order to be able to handle those items, because they have to apply. So it's not something that we're just going and doing checks on people just randomly. It's a very specific application process, and it's something that people are informed of, and they know what they're doing when they are going into requesting to do these kinds of jobs. But to do these kinds of investigations for other countries, no, we don't do that.
Yes, the question specifically was looking at, you cited an example of Uganda having developed a list of select agents. I'm wondering whether you've reached out to support the Ugandan government in establishing their own investigation system, not necessarily the FBI investigating Ugandans, but the Ugandan government doing that kind of investigation.
Oh, in terms of saying, hey, here's how we do it. How can we help you set up the same system?
Yeah, yeah.
I can't speak for the whole FBI, but that is part of the reason why I'm here, is to talk about how we do it and put that idea in your mind. Maybe this is something that you would also like to do, and certainly, we do a lot of outreach, not just my unit, but the FBI in general. And I'm certain that if someone reached out and said, hey, that there are pathways to do that, pathways, through our respective governments to say, hey, what do you think? Can you help us, and give us some advice on how, certain aspects that we should have in our system that you have in your system.
Great. We have another question here.
Yes. Thank you for your speak. I would like to know if the FBI do the investigation if we send the sample from one country, the other country, no US, between two countries, different US. Do you understand?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite clear exactly what your question is.
For example, in two country, African country, if the US FDA do the investigation of selected agents.
Yeah, so the question is, do you investigate exchange of those select agents between other countries that don't include the US?
No, we don't investigate in other countries unless there's some invitation to help with something.
Thank you, Dr. Cropp. I want to find out why this is put under the Department of Justice as opposed to Department of Health.
So it is under the Department of Health. Sorry, it was in my second or third slide. Of course, the program is under the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's just the background check part that the FBI conducts, because we have access to the criminal databases to do the checks, not Health and Human Services. But the actual select agent program is under the Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Thank you.
Thank you for this presentation. I want to ask how can you prove the misuse of pathogens? I know that it is difficult to make the difference between accidental or intentional harms from biological pathogens.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and that is an important thing that is an important distinction to be able to make, and that is again why law enforcement gets involved, to be able to do those sorts of investigations, to make that determination. Was this an accidental introduction? And certainly that is not. Sometimes it's a very simple. A very simple investigation, but not always. And I agree with you. Accidents do happen, and we understand that. But it's also important to do a thorough investigation. And in that case, we have investigators who are especially qualified. We have our weapons of mass destruction WMD coordinators who are specially trained special agents. So they are agents, FBI agents, in each field office in the United States. And they're specially trained on all the modalities of WMDs, so chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive modalities. And they will often spearhead these investigations because they're specially trained to be able to recognize um, these types of events and to be able to spearhead those investigations.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions here or online? Yes? The microphone.
Thanks, Susan, for a very thorough and comprehensive overview of the process of personnel reliability. You gave us a great example of a real case where someone had a rather sketchy background of check kiting and also presumably family violence and perhaps drug use as well. And in that case, the FBI, because of the set of rules set out, was not able to recommend the person not be employed. Presumably, though, that lack of recommendation from the FBI would not stop the institution itself from saying, well, we've got this background check. Those are not characteristics that we want to employ. Or would that be a problem for the institution?
Well, so you are correct, but the results of that background check, I mean, those results are not made public. So the only thing that goes from the FBI back to HHS is that the person is not rejected.
Okay, let's recast that then. Is there anything
So if an institution wants to do their own background check and have their own investigator look for things in a person's background that they think might disqualify them, that is certainly their right. But that can be expensive, right? And not all institutions, although certainly institutions that are licensed to work with select agents and toxins have at least have the ability to, they're not going to be very small institutions because there are a lot of requirements that they have to put in place and I'm looking for a word, the qualifications that they have to meet to be able to have laboratories that handle these. So they may have better resources to be able to do that. But yes, the institutions themselves, and again, this is why I'm saying it's a good thing for you to also not just count on this, but to know the people that you are hiring, particularly the people that you are hiring to work with select agents and toxins or dangerous pathogens, whatever you want to call them. But you know that these are dangerous materials, potential GCBRs that you want to make certain are not going to get out. Then doing your own background check as best you can is probably a good idea. And that's up to the institution. They can make the final decision whether or not to hire a person.
Yes, we have another question here.
Thank you, Suzan, for this presentation. Unless I'm so wondering about your this exclamation about no video, no record, no anything. But anyway, I consider that this is a select agent, but on the other side, the select agent program website contains most of the informations we are interested to get in. My question regarding for you is that regarding the project in Uganda, you're saying that the project is that establishment of the national inventory for the select agent or dangerous pathogen. My question regarding this program or this project, do you are involved in this project or not? This is one issue. Okay, if not, do you know how this project go on? I mean, how they collect the data and who is responsible for fully controlled on this inventory? Is it the Ministry of Health in Uganda or is it the Prime Ministry of Uganda? or the funder of the project is responsible or sharing by some way?
Okay, so no. Was I involved? No. Or the FBI involved. Sorry, I know you don't mean me personally, but no. I can certainly share. They have a publication on the development of that database. It's my understanding from that publication that is the Ugandan Ministry of Health that is responsible for the collection of that information and for the centralization of that data. But sir, I can certainly share with you that publication so that you can, and it has all the details. It's really fantastic.
Yes, please.
What they have
We
done
need
and
this
put together.
publication.
So I can share that with you. Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other question here?
Oh, and sorry, just very quickly. We actually have to put that disclaimer for all of our presentations. It's not just this one, because it's on select agents, because certainly the information on the select agent and toxins program is publicly available, and I can certainly send you the links to the publicly available websites so that you can get the information on that. That's just something that we are required to do no matter what I'm presenting on. So, sorry.
Yeah, I have one last question for you. If any of these participants wanted to establish a similar arrangement in their countries, how would the FBI support them? What would the process of getting your support look like?
So certainly, you contacted me with an email and asked if I would participate in this in this meeting, and certainly, it's a very good thing. I was actually able to attend the first Symbio Africa meeting, and that was wonderful. And I think that what you're doing here is fantastic. You're bringing the right people together to talk about an urgent problem, and you're trying to do it proactively. You're trying to take care of everything that you possibly can in advance to prevent something from happening. And we absolutely support that kind of proactive action. In terms of getting our support, I would say that there are certainly a lot of steps towards doing this sort of thing. For example, Uganda put together their electronic list of dangerous pathogens and the locations, the institutions that hold them in response to the World Health Organization's joint external evaluation. And that's certainly a good start. And so that was not FBI assisted. That was, they took information that was recommendations from the WHO and moved forward from that. And certainly the details in that they've put in the publication on the establishment of that database are helpful to everybody. You can always make a request to say, hey, can you come and help us with something? Can you give a workshop? Can you teach us what you know? And that request can always be made. And then those requests get evaluated, through our chain of command, I guess, for lack of a better term, to determine availability and practicality and that sort of thing. So that's certainly a request that can be made, and is certainly something that, if someone contacts me and says, hey, we would like to have this, we would like you to come here and do a workshop, we would like to learn more about this, that is certainly something, that request is something that I could pass along to my management and say, we are getting this request, is this something that we can do? Is this something that we can support? So without specific details as to exactly what someone would want, I can't say yes or no, and certainly it's not my personal final decision to help out. Ian, when you made the request to me, the first thing I did was go to my immediate supervisor and say, listen, this is a request I got. I think that we should should support it. I would like to do it, and this is why. But then that decision was out of my hands after that point, until he went further up the chain as needed to whomever is able to make that decision, that final decision, and then came back to me and said, yes, go ahead and do it. So that's how that happens. We get requests all sorts of ways, yeah, if someone has a request, I'm happy to pass it along and happy to do whatever I can to help support that.
Great. Thank you very much. So I hope all of us have had how we can start off having similar verification in our own countries. Shoot an email and pray that the management approves the engagement.